Caught in the riddle, woven in the song. Ring out the bell, sing high, sing long. Call up the river, take my hand. Sing of the things we can't understand. Sing, 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 sing unto me. A whisper of morning claps just the trees. A night of black cloth gone telling the bees. I'm like a moth on the wing to the light you land. Bring me a turn around, turn me to the end. Sing, 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 sing unto me. I stood by the mountain all of an evening. What a lovely epitaph, oh, as the sun rose over me. A tapestry of color and sound rise above us and cover the cold hard ground. Oh, Mother Mender, stitch and sew, nurture, prosper, thrive and grow. Yours is the labor that planted the seeds. Yours is the fruit that came from the tree. Sing unto me. The cloth is magic, the thread is gold. Sing with me till we grow old. Basket of cotton, bundle of yarn. Sing yourself into my arms. Sing, sing, sing unto me. I stood by the mountain all of an evening. What a lovely epitaph, oh, as her wings encircled me. A symphony of color and sound rise above us and cover the cold hard ground. Sing, sing, sing unto me. Sing unto Sun and sheen, carved and wrought, the things to be given, not sold nor bought, the things to which you turn our hand, leave a ripple on the sand. Sun and sold and carved and wrought, the things to be given, not sold nor bought, the things to which you turn our hand, leave a ripple on the sand. I stood by the mountain all of an evening. What a lovely epitaph, oh, as the sun set over me. A symphony of color and sound rise above us and cover the cold hard ground. Sing, sing, sing unto me. On the ribbon and sun. Sing, sing, sing unto me. On the ribbon and sun. Sing, sing, sing unto me. On the ribbon and sun. Sing, sing, sing unto me. Sing, sing, sing unto me.
Good evening and welcome back to Avalon City, damn it. I should come up with a sensible input startup phrase that doesn't immediately make me think about what the next line should be. Right.
I mean, pragmatism doesn't start with welcome anyway. The actual becomes a roses often. Take the hand.
Well, yes, but so yes, we had a build a thing to help people with their target practice, which I briefly glanced at last time after we made our ludicrous cat feeding device, which ended up terrifyingly complicated and yet apparently quite good.
Happily, the world is not short of ludicrous cats.
Yes. So it has two X-bus outputs to the numeric displays, and X and Y indicate where the target was hit, and detect indicates when they have fired their weapon. So to determine the point value of a shot, find the Euclidean distance using the Pythagorean theorem between the hit location and the centre of the target, which is located at 50-50. And then assign points for distance less than 10 you get 4 points, 10 to 20 you get 2 points, 20 to 30 you get 1 point, over 30 you get -2 points. The numeric displays should be updated with the trainees' score as they compete and should flash 3 times at the end before turning off to indicate that the game is over. So why are there 2 displays? What's meant to happen there then? Right, 2 trainees each take 4 shots. Right, I see. Right. So and your entertaining thing of having to flash 3 times probably means that I have to be able to remember both scores throughout. So essentially on the input side, we want something that notices... I mean, we could be really silly. We could go, no one is going to fire accurately at the bottom left corner of the target area, and therefore any non-zero value on X and Y is probably good enough to detect a shot, except there because someone does actually fire accurately in the bottom left corner of the target area.
Someone writing test cases anticipating your dodge.
So we do have to pay attention to all 3 inputs, which is of course slightly infuriating, but the detect input is just a logic input, so we can wire that through a DX300 or similar. So I feel that our first step should just be something that repeatedly detects input and sorts out how many points you get for each one and transmits the points onwards to the to whatever the next stage of the processing pipeline is. So like that could in theory be something as simple as an MC4000 if we can fit all the necessary stuff into it. No, actually, let's connect it up to P2 because that makes it an ordinary logic input. That's probably not actually very efficient in terms of space, is it? And based on the last one, space may be quite tight. Yes, actually it was quite efficient in terms of space, because it turns out we can't get it very close in here because it all gets tangled up anyway. So this wants to do something like no, we're going to need 2 registers if we're going to sort out the Euclidean distance, aren't we? Because we're going to need to construct x squared, or rather x minus 50 squared, and then stash that away and construct y squared, then add them together, rather y minus 50 squared, then add them together. So we're going to actually want a big processor here in order to have the second register at our disposal. Actually, we probably do want that going in about the same direction. Yes. Well, I mean, I saw what happened with the cat feeder. I think this circuit board is bigger, but that makes me suspect that it has to be bigger to fit everything in. So yes, we want to then, if it is, then we do something like and that gets us the precise Euclidean distance. Now, there's a question of whether that's actually what we want, though. So then, or rather, that gets us the square of the Euclidean distance. Since we're only doing comparisons, let's not attempt square root. So then we have, so that's less than 100, greater than or equal to 100 but less than 400, greater than or equal to 400 but less than 900, greater than or equal to 900. So that's fine. All our ranges are reasonable, and saturating arithmetic helps us. Conveniently, these are all also no, they're not sadly successive now powers of 100, even, or multiples of 100. So like, we can do multiple range checks.
Imagine sensible things to make more cumulative. Less than 900 out this, and then if it's less than 400 out this extra, and then if it's less than 100 out that extra. Sort of thing.
Right, yes.
You then throw it out an Xbox 40 CPU that's got enough space to do it.
So if we're going to do that, of course, we have to do that in the accumulator. You can do comparisons perfectly well, but we'd have to do the addition in the accumulator. So we would then need a MOVAC DAT, then start comparing here if we were going to try to cram it all into this processor. I am slightly wondering, like, this one has got 2 spare XBus ports, albeit that the board layout makes it slightly hard to get them out, but I can fix that. I wonder if it might be reasonable to actually stick a ROM onto this with the scoring instructions, because we can pull out the high order digit of the distance, and that could then tell us which ROM entry to pull out to get the score. And that's only 2, and ROMs are cheap. ROMs are only 2 yuan. So it's cheaper than adding an extra processor. Yeah, I think I'm going to try that approach. So to do that, we'll need to move this slightly further out and change x0 to x1. And then we can stick a ROM there. Might want to do the layout differently again, but let's allow this one for now, because then we can just go get digit 3 mov ac x3 mov x2 x0 and then slip 1. And then in here we say 0 1. So if the number begins, if it's 100 or 200 or 300, no, sorry, if it's under 10 you get 4 points. Then you get 2, 2, 2, which takes us to 400. 1, 1, 1. So we want to go up to 900. So that's up to 400. That's up to 500. Up to 600. Up to 700. Up to 800. Up to 900. And then all the remaining cells have -2. Those are several of them are inaccessible. So that should then do a bunch of sums and conclude that the answer is 4. Now that's not right. Is sub 50 the thing I want to do? I think so. Now that gives us 2 ludicrously large numbers. That then gives us 970. Then we get... Oh, digit 2, you idiot. For some reason, while half of this system counts from 1, the other half of it counts from 0. Actually, maybe all of it counts from 0, and I just expect it to count from 1 because it's decimal. Right. Yeah, that gets 9, which advances to there, which pulls out -2, and then the whole thing seizes up because there's nothing reading that yet. Excellent. Right, well that worked quite well. So now what we need is something that, given a succession of scores, handles updating the display correctly. So my kind of hope is, surely this isn't that complicated. We can fit it into one extra processor, 2 registers, one of which stores each of the scores. So the idea is we get 8 shots. The first 4 are added. First 4 go to. Oh yeah, that's kind of unpleasant, isn't it? The first 4 go on one person, and the other... problem with that is now I want something that can count to 4 and the two current scores, which we can't sensibly do in two registers. And we have like this fairly complicated thing that we'll probably need an entirely separate set of stuff for. Maybe I actually have one processor per player for the scores. That seems like it might actually be more sensible. Because then might still want we don't want to have to how do we count sensibly? Do we borrow a ROM just as a counter? Maybe that's a better approach. Actually, we've got a spare ROM we can use as a counter, haven't we? We could use this one as a counter. Like, its right-hand port is unused. It's an address pointer automatically advances whenever you read from it. Oh, curses! That means we need two XBus ports to use it, though, doesn't it? So you can, if you don't need it to count very high, you can simply read from it each time you want to count. Read from the data port each time you want to count, and then read the address port to see where you've counted to. Yes, this is occasionally useful, but the problem.
Do the address and data ports have independent counters?
So the ROM has two address ports and two data ports, and each address port corresponds with one data port. So, and it has, yes, essentially it's dual. The ROMs and RAMs are dual ported. I haven't yet found much of a use for dual ported ROM, though we've certainly used dual ported RAM. But the problem is that needs two XBus connections, because you have to be able to read from the data port to advance the counter. And if I'm going to do this in a single processor, I only have one data port available. Only one XBus port available. Okay, well, let's try doing this as just counting up one player's score and see if that's reasonable. Even then, like, since we don't have a swap instruction, and assuming we can't read from the score, worth testing, I suppose. But I mean, we can, after all, do 4 rounds like this. Just about. Oh. Are you telling me I have to write to the display every cycle or it goes out? Looks like I do. Okay, that's extra entertaining. So, right. So that means we have to keep writing to the display every cycle to keep it lit.
Simply we jog it through the frame buffer.
It's kind of awkward because reading, I mean, I'd use buffer. The problem is that at the moment this thing like does an SLXX naught, waits for a signal, but we need it. We can't really do that, and we don't have the use of a math coprocessor as an XBus buffer. I mean, this almost makes me. What we could use is a RAM, an actual frame buffer. I mean, we'd only be using the first 2 entries. We can take advantage of the dual porting and have one processor that just repeatedly, once per cycle, reads. It's going to have that irritating thing that it'll turn out to read from the RAM before the other half was written to it. And we end up having to have a pile of NOPs or something. But that's fine, I suppose. It's got to. We could easily have it do a delay loop on the accumulator if it's going to be its own processor. Because, otherwise we end up in the awkward situation that you can't test whether an XBus port is ready for reading. You can sleep on it or you can try to read from it, and both of those cause your processor to hang in slightly different ways.
Yeah, so you want to say something like select.
Yes, but there is no select, so I can't do a wait until this XBus port wakes up or 1 time unit. Well, 1 and a bit time units. Okay, I think thus, yes, the frame buffer in a RAM chip is going to have to be our slightly silly thing here. With the extra complication that we have to initialize it with something that will blank the display. But I bet that what that means is we have to send nothing. And yes, it's possible for the scores to return to 0. So that's then incorrect in that it displays 0 from the start. You can move it a bit to the right while not. No, you can't go under there apparently. Right, so, well, I mean, let's try building something based on this and then see what happens. So, now we have to wait. Now we have to... no thanks. Now we have have something that like does counting and oh goodness, I just had an even more mad thought. That might work. No, we need slightly more. I'm wondering if what we actually do is have this processor, which could be a bit smaller if we did this, just write all of the results into RAM. Actually, hang on, don't we just have this processor write all the results into RAM, and then have this one every time it has to display, read in the first 8 elements of the RAM, top them up as it goes, and spit them out, because that's fairly simple. It's like add mov, add mov. I think that's slip one, right? That is more than you can fit in a little processor, but like it does make it very simple. And then that means that the addition is a lot. Yeah, I'm kind of tempted by that. No, you can't put it that far to the right, Ben. The X-bus doesn't wire up if you do that. Hang on, no. I can move it to the right. What I do is I stick a link in there. Then it can safely go there. I have no idea if this is going to matter, but... So then the idea is we just go... and discover that this is like, whoops, no, and discover that this is like one instruction too long. Oh no, right. So the only problem here is that this is going to be too slow, or rather this processor is going to be too fast. Yes. In that by the time this one finally writes something to the RAM, this one's going to have long since read the first element. Yes, I'm slightly curious as to how it ends up reading 0 right at the start. Because when we first built this, but it only actually complains when I write something out. Indeed, I know that, which of course is also another problem with the fact that we've run out of space in this processor. Oh, right. It goes out at the end of, or after we've done all our processing for this time step. And before the validator checks whether we've got the right output. So yes, this is a very cute approach, but apparently doesn't work. Largely because time goes the wrong way. Because yes, this will obviously, I mean, we'll need some mechanism for testing whether we should whether we should display anything at all, and displaying nothing can only be done by not writing to the display, and it needs, which will mean one extra instruction to set some condition flags appropriately, and it needs a mechanism for delaying until the RAM has been updated, because otherwise, yes, things don't happen at the right moment. Which is annoying, because otherwise it's a nice plan. So we can reduce those four add x zeros to an add, a test and a jump. So we can free two extra instructions, which gives us enough space to have some simple input that indicates whether the display should be on at all. But that kind of doesn't help, because we still, additionally with the simple input, have a timing problem. And we don't have any XBus inputs to hang an SLX on, or a read on. And I mean, we don't have enough spare instructions, because we only just gained 2 to have a tight loop that loops on another simple input, which will be another way to do a delay, albeit a rather expensive one. So yeah, that's kind of not going to work quite. I mean, let's do that change, the change I just thought of, and check that it works. So we end up instead going add x0 teak x1 4 minus jump x, where x is that loop, and then similarly here, teak x1 8 minus jump y, y that loop. So that does correctly accumulate things and gives us 2 spare instructions. Oh! Could we just have... No, we can't just have that tight loop be also the way in which you don't advance time, because as in we could have a tight loop waiting for P1 to go high, say, to signal that we should that something has happened and we should read the next score. But first, that means something else has to be providing us with timing information, which is kind of messy. Or, yeah, so we can't. This is awkward. I mean, I'm kind of inclined to do something particularly stupid, but wondering if I can get away with it. Because there is another approach we could take, which is, rather than storing the current scores in registers or memory or what have you, store them in simple outputs. Because the scores are all fairly small. So you could say like that, and like they can't get big because there are only 4 shots per person before we reset the counters. So what we could do is have a simple signal that's like 0 if the output should be off, and some number offset slightly from, say, 50 to indicate an actual score. The problem with that is we still have the slight timing problem, but if we use an if we use an MC6000, we've got lots of space. We could then signal. No, we can't signal using XBus. The whole point is that we need something to desynchronize things. Do I have a fundamental design problem here relating to synchronization? Is there some way I can solve it? Okay. I think I know what my fundamental problem here is, which is that in any given time unit, we either do or do not detect shot. And at the moment, I distinguish between shot and no shot by presence or absence of an XBus signal coming down here. But that means that it's hard to detect no shot downstream of this processor, which means that nothing knows that it should update the display with the same number it already has. So nothing ever gets a signal that says it is now safe to not update the display. So that suggests that fundamentally my use of XBus to send my design of having an XBus signal that sends each scoring event is a bad one, because we can't sensibly build anything downstream of that will work correctly. Right, well, in that case I'm going to need to redesign that step. Now there is actually something I've noticed, which is that there's no way to score 0. So we could have this thing transmit a 0 on those occasions when nothing has been when there has been no shot received, and transmit a non-zero value when a shot has been received, and then the downstream could then only count the non-zero values, but it would get a positive signal that no shot had happened. And I think that's what we want to do. Right.
I'm not throwing away no shot.
Yes, something like that. That was the whole problem, that I was throwing away no shot. Right, so that actually means I just want to stick in a minus mov 0 x 0 there, and then redesign everything down here to work completely differently. Still don't know how it's going to work, but I've proved that my previous design would never work. So whatever I'm going to do, it better be different from my previous design. So, one approach would be some kind of a counter for one processor for each of these outputs, and something that sends signals to each processor as appropriate to tell them that things need to be done. So we would have something here that goes. So it wants. I mean, overall, its general approach then would be wait for x naught, mov x naught to 1 of x2 or x3, mov 0 to the other one. Add 1 to the accumulator. What? No. Why are you doing that? I mean, that slups x naught could also just be a slup 1, really. But that's not right, because we only want to add 1 if that signal is non-zero and we don't have a register to stick that signal into. So you might need a bigger processor for this job, which is kind of annoying. Can we move this arrangement down and left a bit? So that we can put a big processor above this ROM. Alternatively, could we put the ROM on the left? Not really, because we've got all these tracks to get in. No, I think that ROM has to be on the right. Let's see how tight we can get this down here. No, that's not going to work because we can't get the signal that needs to go to P0 around all the rubbish then. Sorry, to P1. So this can go down safely, but only by 1 notch, I think. And then it could go. Oh no, but then we can't connect. Yes, we can. No, we can't. So that means if we want to connect anything to X0, we do actually need to move this to the right. So I'm not sure we gain an awful lot by this, because we've moved it 1 square down and 1 square to the right in order to try to fit another processor in up there. Let's undo it all for now, and we'll see if we can see what we can accomplish. So I think we do need the extra registers of an MC6000. I mean, that's actually a slip 0, a slip 1 really, at the end. Because we know that this is going to send us something every cycle, every time unit. So then we do read it. If it's zero, so if it's 0, then there'll be a bunch of stuff that we need to work out. I suppose, yes. No, no, that's fine. So let's do a really problem is that we also need this start up in extinguished state, where notably while we know that in the extinguished state we must start with both scores being 0, we can actually, I think, hit both scores being 0 in normal play by getting 2, 2, minus 2, minus 2, 2, 2, minus 2, minus 2, or indeed 2, minus 2 repeatedly for all of the shots. And therefore we can't just say, are both of our registers 0, therefore then the display should be blank. So that means we have this annoying... Do we have something that one processor that kind of steps through a state machine with its program counter, where the states are like off and then running and then flashing the things at the end and then off again? It's only 3 states. It kind of feels like it's the job of something in the output stage, though. But something also needs to do this counting how many things we've got, and we end up with we don't want this to be counting up to 4 with the program counter, because that involves far too much stuff. But on the other hand, if we're doing it with do we go back to writing things into RAM again? But now with the synchronizing X-bus signal, whose sole purpose is to tell the next processor when to advance, when the RAM has been updated correctly. So if we did that, we might have this processor do something like... don't think I'm going to be doing arithmetic on it. So ponder. So then that needs to be, if it is not 0, then jump out. Right, if it is 0, then jump out. Then I'm wondering how we... Well, keep writing, Ben. So that obviously doesn't do very much that's useful. That's not right. So that correctly records 8 shots. So then it could, after it has updated the RAM, do a mov null x1 as a signal to the next stage that it should update the display. So then this can then go then this one has the problem that it's quite hard to do this addition because we can't. Oh yeah, then we do what we did last time, don't we? Which I think might have needed a bigger processor. Yes, it did. Let's put in the bigger processor now while I know that I'm going to need it. I might have a slight layout problem here. I also have a slight not enough X-bus port sound problem, don't I? I want to wire up both score 1 and score 0, but that's 2 ports. Maybe we actually replace that with 2 processors. Yeah, that's ugly as well. Because even then, like, we can connect that up. But then if we put in another one, we can might be able to wire it in parallel with a bit more creative layout. But we then can't get the synchronization working properly. This is really tricky. So yeah, I don't like this design either. So what if we... I mean, I'm pretty happy with... But what if we had this instead do what like 3 versions ago did? And... so... So that, what that does is, if the accumulator is less than 4, send the number we just received down x0 to x2 and send 0 to x3. Otherwise, send the number we just received to x3 and send 0 to x2. And if the number was non-zero, i.e. it was actually a shot, increment the accumulator and start again. So that sends the shots down 2 different routes depending on whether they're in the first 4 shots or not. We obviously have to do something at the end, and we may have to do something at the start. Well, I don't know that we have to do something at the start, actually. We might be able to do that by other means. So then, based on that, we could then have a couple of processors one driving each output that each do one set of addition and can possibly do some other clever things, because we could arrange that you can send different signals that indicate, for instance, turn the display off. Yes. So I think we may have to be slightly... Actually, I think what we have there is we increment the accumulator earlier, and then if the accumulator is non-zero, we stop sending the display off message and start sending something else. I think if I just rearrange this loop a little, I mean, I still won't actually make it work yet. I'm going to do this badly initially. But I reckon now we want another test down here that handles the flashing case, and we want this to send something different if the accumulator is 0 here. So we should actually have another test that says if the accumulator is still 0, do something different again. Possibly do nothing indeed. And we've got 4 instructions in there. But I don't want to try to constrain how I code these ones just yet. in particular because it's okay for these processors to just stop stop in between rounds because they don't have to transmit anything. So then this one goes. I mean, in the extreme case, of course, these just go add x naught dat. Rather add x naught mov ac x3 slup 1, and like this is nowhere near good enough, but it demonstrates how simply we can get something that's vaguely correct. Well, vaguely correct anyway. What? Worked for the first bit, so it correctly accumulates scores for the first player. You're right. So, oh, have I just got one of my boundary conditions wrong? Okay, that should actually have been 4 anyway. Right. So we start up wrongly, but then we display the correct scores throughout the round, and then we handle the end of rounding correctly. But the nice thing is we've got quite a lot of space in which to do some extra thinking. So one thing is that we need to not do anything if the accumulator is still 0 after that. I mean, I'm sure this is a slightly over the top approach, but because it's fine to have these get stuck. Oh, except that then they'd need an SLX. Well, SLX X0 is the same amount of space as slup 1. I mean, it may be that there's a better way to do this, but I'm kind of wondering if actually we can do all of the display off bits by just stalling these processors. At which point they become cheaper. Right, so now those ones stay correctly blank. So then our only problem is how the hell we do that flashing bit at the end. Well, how about we don't try for now? Instead we go... Okay, that didn't work quite right because, ooh, yes, we need a way to reset the scores, don't we? So that to me says we want a signal that says to these two, please can you flash for a bit? Please can you go into flashing state? They then expect to receive some zeros. Ugh, I've run out of space. So we could have that send a special signal to say you've reached the end. Why am I carefully typing this twice? You have to count to 3 now. How tedious.
You have to say it's really clever.
Yeah. Right, I'm now having evil thoughts about... Oh. It ends up being a bit messy about whether we send the accumulator over the XBus links, but we end up with... That then ends up being 2 instructions, which is kind of fine. I mean, send the shot counter over the XBus links and then have these ones do the comparison. Which would mean that we send 2 numbers. Oh, but that then we could simplify this a bit. So this is a kind of TIS-100 trick where you have one processor essentially send conveniently in the right order the numbers that another one's going to need at the moment when they're going to need it. So rather than having these 4 conditional instructions, we could send the same signals down both XBuses and have these ones, based on the accumulator that they receive, work out what to do with the input. We still have the problem of how we handle that counting to 3 for the flashing. But maybe we can play some more silly buggers up here to do that. So if we, instead of doing this, just went... completely lost as to what instructions I've got left. And then actually let's scrap that bit as well. Right. And then we could do something like okay, no, we need then to do we can't just do that as a test on X0 conveniently. Instead, move it into DAT and then So now DAT in these processors is how many shots have we seen, and they use that to decide how they're going to display things. Hence, okay, that doesn't work. Oops. No, that's right. No, that's not right. You're being an idiot, Harris. Carry on. Oh yes, we need. No, that's fine. Oh, those each need a slip one at the end, don't they? Right. So they now wake up the displays correctly, but don't. What? Oh yes, of course they now need to have slightly different programs, because the only thing that allows us, because it's now their job to work out who is who. Right. Okay, now they're both backwards. Right. Right, good. So now they need to do the right thing when they receive a count, when DAT is larger. And that's slightly tricky because they will keep receiving zeros and won't see from their point of view DAT increasing while the flashing is going on, unless we add some extra cleverness here, which would not be very hard actually. We could say if ACK only ignore 0 inputs if ACK is less than 8. Like that. Sorry. If ACK is not greater than 8. No, hang on, let me think about this. We want to say if ACK is greater than 8 or ACK is not equal to 0, except that we have to invert the logic because we don't have not equal. Yeah, you're right. No, they're two different registers. Sorry. If ACK is not... So, if ACK is greater than 8 or DAT is non-zero, but we can't say is non-zero, so instead we have to say... I can't do it like that. Let's try a different approach. That test is only relevant and should thus only be executed if ACK is less than 8, and we have to keep minus being the and if hang on, no, that's right. And so if we set that, so we could do, if we did that, then we only got like 4 cases to test. I'll probably guess the right one early-ish. So then that will say if less than 8, then is it equal to 0? If it is not equal to 0, we'll execute that. If it's greater than 8, then we fall straight through to that. That's correct, right. So then that will cause ACK to keep advancing. So let's test whether that works correctly. Why is there a blank line in that process? So what this should now do is that ACK should suddenly, where we've got 8 counts, keep counting fast. And, well, it probably has to reset itself at some point, but we'll worry about that later. So that means that these can now, if AC is over 8, look at, like, the low order bit. That's kind of inconvenient. Multiply by 5, look at the low order digit, that'll do the trick. Except it's in DAT where we can't do that kind of thing. We could do if it's this or that or the other. So we currently have if DAT is equal to 0, then don't send things. So if we say if DAT is equal to 0 or DAT is equal to 9 or DAT is equal to 11 or DAT hang on 9, 11, 13. Bet I've got this in antiphase, or I've screwed up the conditionals, but I think I might not have. That wasn't a good start, was it? Okay, no, I think I've accidentally ended up with an and there. Try making all of those minus instead. Does that work better? I don't think it does. Oh, maybe it does actually. Well, that works better at least at the start. Let's run the full thing. So it starts up okay. Right, well that's getting better. Now all we need to do is go if AC is 13, 14, 15. Something like that. Not quite. Oh, we need to reset the counters as well. We don't have a reset counters button, do we? That we'll have to fix. Sorry, I'm just going TAC 15. If it is, send minus 999 to both things. No, actually we have to send... No, that's not good enough. We have to send several minus 999s to push things all the way down to saturate at minus 999.
Well, I mean,
but I can send a sentinel value.
you don't need to. The display processor is already receiving data, receiving 14 or something at a time. They can reset their counters there.
Yes, that's true. They can reset their counters based on the time. Yes, you're quite right. So we can just have a TDAT 14, 15, I don't know what the precise number is. It's already written to the display at that point, hasn't it? Yes. If so, mov naught AC. I'm kind of observing that we have this 14 here, which is the number of elements in a RAM. Yeah, okay, let's see if that works. Very close to working. Maybe we need to change one of these numbers. Let's try changing that to 14 instead of 15. Now it's going to turn out they don't correctly reset their counters. No, it doesn't. Well, that was a lot less alarmingly complicated than the cat feeder. And yes, we seem to have done better than modal production costs, slightly to my surprise.
I would be intrigued to know, it's only just occurred to me on this one, whether these graphs, what the scatter plot would be for these graphs.
Yes.
Some people did it with very low production costs, some people did it with very low power usage. Did the same person manage both, or were they trading off against each other?
I suspect there are trade-offs, but I don't know.
I mean, that enormous sequence of teaks with particular numbers, as you say, you could have a ROM in there or something that says what.
Yes.
Which would replace a lot of those instructions with a ROM lookup, and then you get fewer instructions but more cost.
Yes, indeed. Though you might have some difficulty fitting. Well, I mean, we've got quite a lot of space compared to the cat feeder. Yes, our one has gone fairly cheap in parts, surprisingly. I'm fairly sure that some of these tests could be slightly more efficient. And our power usage is fairly vicious because we execute a lot of instructions in lots of processors every cycle. Like, even when nothing's happening, we're sending X-bus signals all over the place. Right. So our security people, Enzo Capretti, has found that yes, the practice ranges are operational and we're already seeing improvements in accuracy. Message from Sun Hao Tian. Recommendation against prediction. When we talk about the future, are we speculating or are we predicting? The distinction isn't always so clear. Statistical methods appear to introduce some precision into this imprecise art, but often fail to question fundamental assumptions that later prove to be untrue. Despite the sensationalist title, Against Prediction by Richard Kendall Fay is an important argument in this vein. We should not be trying to predict the future, we should be inventing it. With many revolutionary technologies developed here in Avalon City already, not to mention even more radically world-altering projects in the works, we are the clearest demonstration yet that a statistical approach to prediction is simply unworkable. The future is not a continuation of any trend line. It cannot be found inside any normal distribution. The future is an outlier. So from Lisa, our biology thing.
I hope that's on her business card.
Director of the Ocean's Bounty Programme. It's hard to believe, but our first full-size kelp beds are almost ready for harvesting and processing. Derek's been working on the mechanics of the harvester, so we're at a good place now to start designing the control system. We're close to the culmination of the Ocean's Bounty Programme. Soon we'll be feeding the entire population of Avalon City with the delicious cornucopia of foods we created entirely on our own. I'm really excited. So it's 10:30. That's quite early. That means I did the last one in an hour and a half, doesn't it? We've got an hour and a half left until midnight. Right.
Music or Simon Overload?
I'm going to attempt to do this one in the next hour and a half.
How much more Simon is there left?
What? I still need to make the sounds work when you press the buttons,
Okay.
primarily. That's quite complicated.
Yeah.
Kelp harvesting robot. Radio RX is a non-blocking X-bus input connected to a radio receiver. There. Motor X and Y are simple outputs connected to an omnidirectional motor. Harvest is a simple output connected to a kelp harvesting apparatus. The harvester begins at grid location 00. Locations to harvest are received over the radio as XY coordinates. If at least one unharvested location remains, move towards the oldest location, activating the harvest signal when the harvester is over any location. I hope you get a picture with this. Yes, good. Setting motor X or motor Y to 100 for one time unit will move the harvester in the plus X or plus Y direction. Setting it to 50 will cause it not move in that direction. Setting it to 0 will move it in the opposite direction. Since the harvester can move in both the X and Y axes simultaneously, diagonal moves should be made wherever possible to take the shortest path. The harvester will never receive a command to harvest its starting location. That's a strange constraint. There will never be...
Have a sentinel.
There will never be more than 6 pending harvest locations. So conveniently we can fit X and Y coordinates for each one and a sentinel value in the RAM. I mean, that's quite generous. Usually it would just allow you to find out from the test cases whether you were going to overflow your memory. So yes, it tends to, for instance, send us a bunch of a long sequence of locations, and then we spend our time moving around chasing them. So activating the harvest signal when the I presume it means over any location we have been asked to harvest. Yes. So the general rule is we should be as fast as possible trying to harvest the oldest thing in the queue, but if anything else in the queue turns up under our cursor, we should harvest that as well.
Makes sense.
And it looks like this is specified precisely. So in general, we should start by making a diagonal move, which is going to be the easiest thing to code anyway. So I feel that this probably means we have independent X and Y processors, because otherwise we have to do arithmetic on DAT in an MC6000, which is painful. And we obviously have a RAM that stores all the locations we're heading for. And we probably have something... Yes, and then we have a processor that's connected to Harvest that, for instance, repeatedly searches the RAM for whether our current location is over a a thing that we want to harvest. So let's try to get the movement right first. So that suggests that, like, motor X is going to be driven by an MC6000, which does something like but we need it to look at we need it to be able to see both where it currently is and where it's heading for. But actually that's just a TCP, isn't it? So we could have something that does something like TCP X0 ACK. So we essentially expect to receive over X bus where we're currently heading for every time unit, and every time unit we instruct our motor which direction to move in. And then we should adjust the accumulator to match her. So that That would do... That will probably... more or less handle... So if we imagine like a really crude device... So this is a terrible design. Well, that's no good. And this is not intended to be an even slightly sensible piece of design here. The idea here is that I get something that works. So it doesn't move initially. Okay, we're immediately running the motors the wrong way. That's fine. Now we sub on minus and add on plus, which is kind of more sensible anyway. Right, so that's a good start. We correctly drive the kelp harvester to 7.4, and then it stops there. But 7.4 is where we first wanted to go. So good start. Now we have the slight problem that nothing knows that we need to harvest kelp there. So I think we actually want to have these write the current location out to X1 and have a processor that reads those two and somehow decides where to harvest kelp. Probably going to be quite a complicated processor, this one. That's not going to work, Ben. For several reasons. I mean, we can do that, but it doesn't really help when we need to get something to that harvest input. But if we swap those over, I'm sure that won't cause any trouble. Do that. Right, so now this one could go that doesn't really work because we need to And then we can have each of those just... Right, so each of these now transmits its current location once per cycle to this processor. And this one then reads once per cycle where it is and checks if it's at 7,4, and if it is, it harvests. Which is not really very good in the general case, but it should get the first harvesting done. And, like, then we can enhance it so that it knows where other things are. Like, it's got two X-bus ports we can wire into a RAM that will contain the actual locations we're meant to be harvesting. Maybe. Whee! So there's a problem that it keeps on harvesting once it gets there. We'll worry about whether that's acceptable later. So that's all good. Now the slight problem is we really want 3 ports onto this RAM, or possibly 4. But maybe that's not so difficult. Because we need to write into the RAM every time we get a new destination. We need to read the next destination out of the RAM to feed to the harvesters. And we need to sweep the RAM every step in order to check whether we're in a location that needs harvesting. The thing doing the sweeping should also be the one that blanks RAM entries once they have been harvested. And I kind of feel that thus probably the thing that inserts entries should also be the one that instructs the moving devices where to move. Yes, I think that works. Because this thing's going to be quite complicated enough as it is. So it should instead load ACK and DAT with those 2 inputs, shouldn't it? It should go... let's first make that change. Mov x2. So x2 is the x coordinate. x3 is the y coordinate. So then we could... Let's just do our... Then we could just do teak ACK7 plus teak DAT4, and that should have it behave the same as it has done already. It should correctly move and enable the harvester. Right, that looks good. Wish we had the ability to step the to move. Oh no, that may not be so bad. No, okay, I'm not too worried. Right, so then it needs to be able to sweep through the RAM rather than doing these 2 tests. So that's going to be something like, actually more or less what we wrote last time, isn't it? We test if it's equal to x0. If it is not, we ignore the Y value from the RAM. Otherwise, we test that against X0, and then if both of them match, then we turn on the harvester. We also then read the current address, subtract 2, and wipe two cells of RAM. We're running a bit short of space now.
I'm assuming you're going to move the cardboard and the boot at some point.
Oh, yeah. Well, I got one over there because I got them back over.
Yes. Oh, to be fair, I didn't notice them until I tried to come back in that way. I went, oh yes, I also need to get my water, but also...
So at the moment that's only reading one cell of RAM on each move, which is obviously not acceptable. We really want it to move scan all of the RAM on each move. And we can do that by adding a loop with a test if the address pointer of the RAM is 0, and if it isn't, jump back to about there. The only slight problem is that that's 2 instructions and we haven't got 2 instructions to spare. So the obvious approach to that is something that involves using gen instructions rather than writing to P1 directly. Because we can reduce this by 1 by going gen P1 1 0, 1 unit pulse in that case, and then in the minus case gen P1 0 1, a 0 width positive pulse and then 1 width 0 pulse. So that then means we have 2 instructions to spare, and those 2 instructions go I haven't got anywhere to test my sentinel value, have I? So let's see if we want here, if we have not yet found, do we just run to the end of the, we probably run to the end of the RAM anyway, but then we have the entertaining problem that that we may end up, that doesn't work. I mean, we can do, like, at this point, teak x1 0, if not jump x, and x is there. But then these gens don't quite work properly because we both want them to be on the inside this loop so that they'll happen at the right moment, and outside this loop so that they will inside this loop so that they'll happen with the right conditions, and outside this loop so that they'll happen at the right time. And we don't have a register to carefully record whether we want to harvest or not. And the old approach of using mobs could have been made to work, because we could have set P1 to 0 at the start of the search loop, set it to 1 if we ever found anything, or set it to 100 rather if we ever found anything, and then sleep and set it back to 0. Oh, yes, and then sleep. But the thing is that's 3 instructions: mov 0 P1, mov 100 P1, and sleep 1. And we don't have space for 3 instructions even if we remove both of those gen instructions. So the usual trick for this kind of thing would be to instead mov a constant to P1 or some such. But I can't see that being any better. Plus, or mov a register to P1, but especially since we don't actually have any spare registers. I mean, once we've found our target, we would quite like to keep reading the RAM. We don't actually care whether we do anything with it. But that doesn't really help either. I mean, we could, I suppose, have that with a... No, we can't have that with a minus condition, because on the first run of the program, it will then not execute. Well, is my... No, everything is in the correct time zone. Oh no, that laptop appears to have crashed. I have no idea what time it is now. It's 10 to, right. 10 to 11.
Sorry, I've currently got something full screen, so it's not trivial to check.
Sorry, my laptop that's meant to be showing me IRC appears to have crashed entirely. This is not helpful.
It's power connectors coming out.
It's been running on batteries all the time.
Okay, in that case, ignore what it's
Like, it's displaying something, it just says it's 2234. Which is unhelpful. Oh well, let's power cycle it while I'm doing other things and thinking about how on earth I squeeze all of this into this much space, or split it across 2 processors again. So if I were to split it, how would I do that? I suppose you would have a processor to which you transmitted the current coordinates and got back whether to harvest or not. The thing is, yeah, you have to... I can't see actually where we put the split in this. I mean, I suppose we could try to do the X and Y coordinates entirely independently, but that seems... Sorry, I've just had the idea of we have separate processors doing each of X and Y and then just an AND gate on the harvest output. That doesn't work because it's only if X and Y trigger that you want to wipe the 2 cells of the RAM that you've just visited. I'm just curious, what does it look like when we run this then? So what are the first few things we get? We start with that one, then we get that one, so our next move will be rightwards towards 9-4. Then we'll go up and left again, and then down there, then up to there, then all the way over there, and then down, and then up to... I can't work out whether we'll ever visit what we've... So I don't think by this point we will ever actually pass through something that we need to harvest. That one might do it for us, but I wonder if we could at least initially get away with the exceptionally crude approach to this.
Bollocks.
Yes. And then see how long it takes before the test cases detect that we haven't implemented it properly. Right. Horribly crude approach. Okay, that's not much good. Because it doesn't... because it immediately reads the first two things from the RAM, which turn out to be filled at that point. But that's fine. So this should... Yeah, we're kind of short on X-Bus ports on this thing. That's fine. We'll add another process. No, that doesn't work. Maybe it does. No, it doesn't. Oh, I don't know. Yes, it does. Yeah, that's ugly. So how do we do this? So we want to have something that repeatedly reads like the first reads the first two entries from the RAM and sends them to the motor control processors, and then when it gets there advances to the next non-zero entries in the RAM. I mean, that initially can just be advances to the next entries in the RAM. So it could just... We've got a spare X bus on there, so we could wire this to the same RAM port as this, and then have a synchronizing signal over X bus to say when this one is allowed to read its current two entries. Kind of messy. Except this hasn't... no, that's fine. It would... That would mean that it can't... doesn't have enough... It's only got 4 X-Bus ports, and 2 of those are being used to send things to these two. So if we then wire the other two up to the RAM, we have no synchronization mechanism, which we obviously want. Alternatively, we wire one of them up to the RAM data port and rely on something else to set up the address port correctly. But that's... I mean, that kind of would work, I suspect. But I'm now wondering if actually I want to swap the various ports around, because like this one... Because this one, when writing to the RAM, really does should just, each time it receives something, write it to the next two cells in the RAM. And like, if all is well and we don't ever put too much stuff in, then we won't ever... Yeah, I think I built this starting at the wrong end, really. Then we won't ever need to do anything clever here. Like, it would get really awkward if it actually sends us out extra requests that require us to spot the empty gaps in the RAM and defragment the RAM in order to get our new request in the right place in the queue. Like, if it actually requires that it be a queue, that we be able to handle 6 entries after removing ones that we have opportunistically harvested. But I suspect what it really means is if we ignore opportunistic harvesting, we won't ever have more than 6 entries. And so just blanking out entries we've opportunistically harvested will be enough, and we won't have to compact the RAM at the same time. So that would then suggest that the thing reading from the radio can be incredibly crude. Because it just... Excuse me, I tried not to sneeze. It just reads from the radio. If it gets anything, sticks it in the next 2 entries in the RAM. And it's something else's job to work out what to do with this information. So let's do that. So that means that, like, our receiving system is fairly simple. And it just goes... So the general idea there is that it makes sure that our next destination has been correctly recorded in the RAM, and then sends a signal down X3 to tell the rest of the board to do things. And various other things now crash because so that very boringly writes coordinates into the RAM and overwrites itself eventually. Right. So that's quite simple. And then we should have something else that handles reading and probably somehow handles sweeping through looking for harvesting opportunities. How crude would it be to just have 2 RAMs containing precisely the same data? So that then one of them is the one that's used for... No, but we have to have one because the opportunistic harvester has to wipe out entries as necessary, doesn't it? Yes. There. You want triple ported RAM, it will make life simpler.
You mean with 3 ports?
Yes.
Okay.
Because essentially I want, well, importantly with 3 address pointers, because I want one address pointer that says where we're currently adding new destinations to the queue, one address pointer that says where the planner is currently moving to, and one address pointer that the harvester uses when repeatedly scanning through the RAM to work out whether we are in a location that wants harvesting. And infuriatingly, that's 3, and the RAM only has 2 address pointers. So essentially some 2 of those 3 jobs have to share share a port, which is not very hard, and an address pointer, which is quite difficult. And in particular, that means that they essentially each have to store their address pointer somewhere else so that they can reset it whenever they want to do anything. Now, the scanner is kind of simple because it can always reset it. It can always reset it to 0 at the start, so it doesn't have to store it. And the planner at the moment doesn't use its accumulator for anything. So it could use that to indicate where it is in the RAM. Though that's kind of awkward because at the moment the planner doesn't actually know when it's reached its destination. Not that the planner's very clever at the moment, it just writes the same numbers out all the time. And it needs to know that in order to advance its address pointer. And the harvester doesn't really know whether we've reached our destination because it only cares about whether we've reached a destination. So it's really the planner that cares about this. I mean, I suppose we've still got an instruction in each of the motor drivers, so those could send back to the planner where we currently are. But then that means the planner has to either jump through quite a lot of hoops. Maybe it's not many hoops. So what would the planner then do? If we assume that the planner was wired up to the right-hand port of the RAM. Oh, hang on, no, we've run out of X-bus ports on the planner. We can't wire it to an address bus, which is the other thing. So this one doesn't have a spare register, and this one doesn't have a spare X-bus port. Spare registers are kind of easier to get. So we could have this replaced with a bigger processor, even though it doesn't really need it, just to record where the current cue pointer is. No, does it? Ooh. No, it doesn't need to do that. Because it could use the accumulator at a slightly different time. As in, if it could use the accumulator to send the RAM pointer to somewhere, work out, do this bouncing through ACK, and then copy the address pointer back from the RAM, adjusting it as necessary. And so the accumulator bounces between containing something to be written to the next value to go into the RAM and the address pointer that this processor is currently using. So So what does it do, therefore? It doesn't even need to adjust it, does it? So what that will then do, wire that up again, because I think this will actually not crash immediately. So that is correctly writing the new locations into the RAM, and not depending on the RAM retaining its address state in between. So then we could have this processor, or this processor, using the same RAM port, and reading and resetting its pointer to 0 each time it attempts a read. So it would like start. We already have a problem that this one has too much code in it because it currently doesn't work because I couldn't fit the code that worked into it. So I'm a little worried about adding yet another thing, even if it's just a mov naught x1. Though we're probably going to want to swap x1 and x0 in this one as well. Can't actually get any wires into those at the moment, but still. So then right, so even though this one is corrupting the address pointer on that RAM, this processor is correctly restoring it again, and so the data is still getting properly written. Good. So that then means that this port is free for this processor to use to make decisions about movement, if it's going to, but yes, the slight trickiness is, oh god, this has to actually be a big processor, because if it's not going to have an XBus port of a spare for resetting the address pointer on this RAM, it must only read from the RAM if there is a use, if it wants to actually read out a new destination. And then since it's going to keep sending that destination to these two, it needs to store both of the destination coordinates in RAM, so in registers, so that needs to be big. And now we don't quite have enough space because my board layout is completely mad. Yeah, the programming there was useless anyway. It repeatedly wrote, it basically said move to 9,9 continuously, which was not a helpful program. So yes, we need in particular that X1 to be wired up to D1 on that RAM, which is like impossible for 2 or 3 different reasons. I think maybe my big problem here is that I'm assuming that the RAM wiring is the easy bit in my layout, which it is not. So like we're probably better off shuffling things around to put, how do we do this? See, so those just have a single XBus trace connecting them. we have a double X bus trace going into the address and data ports of that. One of the address and data ports of that RAM. So those probably want to be the things that we're reasonably careful with. It would be simpler to use the right-hand port of this RAM. Then then the RAM could go hard up against here. You then have two tracks that have to go round those. I think that would work better, though we may have to change all of the registers. That's a slightly less terrible layout. So obviously now everything has to change because yes.
Every crossing has the top line going vertical.
Presumably.
So then you could have
Like, I'm sure you could just smear it out far enough that you can.
I just don't know why you would. So you could draw one on this. Which has that constraint with features.
So I screwed this up. So MOV at A1. Our incredibly cheap pick and place machine doesn't work if you put in a horizontal thing.
Is it possible that there's actually orientable like slots that plug into it?
I think it's the pick, because the pick and place machine in general seems to only be able to do 180 degree rotations as well.
Rotate the 180 degrees.
But it doesn't actually have a button for that because it'd be kind of pointless. I think, in fact, it is true that. Do those have a rotate button? Yes. Everything can only be rotated by 180 degrees, apart from the RAM and the processors, which are rotationally invariant, except you have to rewrite the code. In that they move ports of the same type, just the numbers change. So, yes, I think the incredibly cheap pick and place machine that we've bought can somehow only do 180 degree rotations. I suppose that means you can make the rotation just a logic output that like drives a great big solenoid that spins the thing round 180 degrees, rather than like needing any cleverness. You just have two stops at 0 and 180. Whereas if you want any more orientations, you actually might need something to be a bit clever.
I mean, the odd thing is, it's not just the pick and place machine you bought. It just so happens that these futurists in Avalon City are using the same pick and place machine.
Well, yeah, I mean, but
the cheap-ass electronics in Shenzhen was using.
Yes, well, Similarly, they can only do single-sided circuit boards. I mean, I kind of imagine that actually the other layer, the one other layer is being used for power, and someone decided that the challenge of getting all your power rails to the right place, while quite an entertaining and complicated one, was not one they wanted to put into the game. I mean, you could probably make an entire puzzle game out of wire up the power rails for this circuit board.
Probably complete.
I wouldn't be surprised. Like, here is a set of pins that need to be connected to plus. Here is a set of pins that need to be connected to minus. Connect the two sets together. Given this set of design rules. That should be x3. That should be mov x1, x3. x2 is indeed the address. And x0 is the signal that we've finished processing.
Right. Good night.
So
I might be around tomorrow.
then this one similarly needs a lot of rejigging because
Oh, I see. Okay.
x0 and x1 have swapped round again. Right. Okay, that crashes because this does nothing. So let's reinsert my terrible program here. Right. And that still correctly records the values into the RAM. Good. So now this thing can read the RAM. So it could instead do I'm just having horrible thoughts about the possibility of, instead of recording our absolute target, recording our position relative to the target. And does that make life simpler ever? Probably not, because then we won't have the faintest idea where we're going. Oh, did it try to suspend itself, I wonder? That might explain it. Right. Okay, that didn't work very well. Yes. That's no good because it needs to wait for the signal from X0, which means that I need to be clever. Or I suppose I can be stupid. Oops. Okay, I'm kind of confused by that. That wasn't what I was expecting. Oh yes, because of course, initially we don't have anything in the RAM. So then the question is, if this one can't adjust its address though, it can't step backwards when it finds that there are no instructions for it to execute in the RAM. I mean, we could... No, I don't like that. Could have it SLX right at the start, in the hope that we will never have to not move again. I don't really like that. I suppose it has to skip zeros anyway, doesn't it? But that doesn't help us either. I was going, well, in that case, maybe if it finds zeros in the first entry, it should obviously move on to the next entry. But the problem with that is that since it doesn't have a connection to the address pin, the address port, it can't see whether it's run out of RAM yet. So it doesn't know when to stop reading those zeros if the RAM is entirely full of zeros, which it is right at the start. And it would just go round and round and round and round, desperately searching for a potential target. And then it will never sleep, and therefore no happiness will ever come to anyone. I suppose there's a simple way to reduce these to a single X bus port, which is to have an entire processor whose sole job is to take the things we read out of the RAM and demultiplex them between these two processors, which seems needlessly complicated. But it does deal with our shortage of X-bus ports. It's kind of ugly, but we've got a lot of space. So maybe we should try it and see what happens. I say we've got a lot of space, but it's kind of awkward getting all these signals to the right places. We could move that down, but then that makes it... Oh, but can't we do something stupid? No, that won't work. I mean, we can move that down. So actually, I think what I want... No, that's not going to work either. What I want to do... That conveniently gets both of those out there. But the thing is that then I need to wire these via the new intermediate processor, which you will observe has to be there, which doesn't work because of that bridge. So the idea of this one is it just repeatedly does mov x0, x3, mov x0 x2 slup 1. And then we can safely do that. Problem is that this all makes it rather tricky to connect everything up. And that A needs to get out somehow. You really don't have any space for that. Do we instead like pull this out and run those tracks underneath this processor and the radio? So that might turn out to be simpler. In particular, we can shift that upwards. Drop that there. No, there's not enough space there either. The problem is that then I want to get that out. If I rotate the radio, then I can put it there. No, that doesn't work because then TX ends up landing on that. But no one cares about what we transmit over the radio. We can transmit rubbish over the radio. Let's see if we get told off for transmitting rubbish over the radio. Well, the radio isn't in the specification. The radio transmissions aren't in the specification, so obviously it's fine for us to transmit anything we like. Right, so right. Well, I mean, if that works, it's a reasonably nice layout. So then this needs to send everything to X. Three. does this work? I've completely forgotten how this system's meant to work now. Have I got my processors confused? Have I got everything confused? What on earth is any of this doing? Right, so that's the one. Yes, everything's moved around. That's the one that receives from the radio. It then signals up there to this one that it should start moving the harvester. So this one then receives that signal on X2, reads the coordinates in, and writes them out to thing. That's obviously overcomplicated, but so then its problem is that I'm losing track of what the problem was that I was trying to solve now. That initially we are at 0, 0. Yeah, we have that bug as well. And then everything crashes. Right, okay. No, we're not sitting at a breakpoint. Yeah, okay, those are all wrong. That should be X3 as well. So, yes. That one is now blocked, sending its next signal to X0. Because that one's got a MOV X0 null, whereas meant to have a MOV X2 null. Right, so lots of things are wrong, but at least it doesn't crash anymore. So at that point, first those should be X0 now. We should read from the RAM, not from the address pointer. So then what that one should do is it should go if 0 loop again, if both of those 0 loop around again to try to find a non-zero value, and if after that, but if the address pointer is now 0, i.e. we've looped all the way round, there is really no work to do. So this wants to do something like so that's obviously wrong, but that causes it to search the RAM. We should then also have it if there is only do this if we haven't wrapped all the way round. So that processor should now scan all the way through the RAM. Having reached the end, drive both motors to 50. Right, that's pretty good. It then incorrectly harvests. So that's fine, we know the harvester's wrong. So then we write something into a location into the RAM. Then that thing fetches that location from the RAM, finds that it is not 0, and so immediately transmits it to the motor controllers. Then we don't get a new packet, and that processor then does the wrong thing because it doesn't know where, it doesn't have any indication of whether it's reached its destination yet. So what it needs to do, so it annoyingly needs to be able to see whether we are currently at our destination. So it has a connection through to the motor controllers. So we could have them send their current location back up X0 as well. Have this multiplex them onto X1 there. Have this then read the locations, compare them against AC and DAT, and thus decide whether to advance its pointer. Right, okay. But running out of instructions. So what are our loops here? We have that loop is searching for we want, there is the point we want to jump back to if we don't need a new destination. So if we don't need a new destination, we jump to X. Let's try that. So things go kind of wrong at the start, but that's actually only the harvester goes wrong at the start. So that processor scans the whole of the RAM, desperately searching for a destination, and finds none. And so says, okay, we'll stay where we are. Actually, strictly it says, okay, we'll move to the origin, and we hope that that doesn't cause us any embarrassment. It then gets back. Are we in the correct destination? Yes. So we need to try again next cycle to find a location, find a destination. So we do that. We find a destination. We transmit the destination to the movement processors. They tell us where we are. We are now at 1-1. Well, I mean, we think we're at 1-1. Yes. But that's not where we want to be, so we go back into that loop. We transmit the new destination again. You got stuck. What's not sleeping here? That one's blocked on writing to there again. Yes, because that's our signal to say we can do things, but we might want to skip all of this bit. No sense of way to avoid that then. We want that instruction there to execute, even if we end up, even in the case where at the moment we execute that jump X there. But that's kind of awkward. So if we end up it, because that, yes, that jumps us back to there. And we can't put the after. We can't do this bit of working out after the sleep. Now this has a bunch of conditionals in it anyway that mean that it's quite hard. Maybe we can get away with that. I have no idea if that's going to work. That was surprisingly effective. Right, we did all the movements correctly there. The harvesting operation needs to be written properly, but that's looking surprisingly good. I feel that we should tidy this up a bit, but so that works. So then the question is, can we write the code that runs in here to correctly check whether we're currently at any interesting location, and if we are, then harvest. So what does it do at the moment? It fetches the current coordinates into AC and DAT. It then resets the round pointer to 0. Then does the same code we've seen elsewhere for are we currently in the location pointed to by the RAM. Essentially that bit of code there. Only that's actually reading from there. Shush. Then well, how about we go for the really crude approach? So we go, so that's those 3 instructions. Let's just delete everything else and think about this. Those 3 instructions. Now we have plus if we are in the correct location and minus if we are not. So then we want to do, if we are we actually have a, so if those, there's actually one more thing. We need to check if AC and DAT are both 0. Because if they are, that means we're being asked to harvest in 0, 0, which we can't. That's kind of inconveniently large amount of stuff to test. So then, assuming that we aren't searching for 0, 0, then we check if then we reset the RAM, check if what we are currently looking at is the correct thing. If it is, if it isn't, then see if we have reached the end of the RAM yet. And if we haven't, jump back round to X. So now we have reached the end of the RAM. No, hang on. Now the problem is we have either reached the end of the RAM or... No, I think we want to do... So if we... Oh God, if we have reached the end... No, if we... So there we're reading... That's our reading from the RAM. And then the problem is at this point... Well, maybe we should... No, we... Oh, so if we've successfully found that we need to harvest, then we'll be in the plus state here, and we can do mov 100 p1. So then the only problem is that we need to handle the case where we aren't harvesting in the current location, and the case where we have wrapped all the way around the RAM and found no harvesting that we need to do. Yes. So we can probably do this by falling out of this loop by 2 different routes. Yes, that works, doesn't it? So we go... we test x1 against 0, or rather we don't. What we want to do is to somehow fall out of the loop. This is complicated. Now, that's not going to work, because if we're only going to have one instruction that gets us back to the start of the loop, then we can't fall out of it with different sets of condition codes, unless one of the sets of condition codes is no condition code set, which we might be able to achieve. Okay, how much space do we have? We have a bit of space. So if instead of that teak we have it, so at this point in the loop we have plus indicates that we have found the target, and minus indicates that we have not found the target. If we then do TCP X1, so at this point X1 is 0 if we have just wrapped all the way around, and greater than 0 if we haven't. So that means that now after this instruction, now that's no good. After this instruction we have plus if X1 has not wrapped around, and that's not what we want, because we want the loop continuation instruction, the jump back to the start of the loop, to happen if we have both not found the correct target and not run out of the memory. And not found the correct target pretty much has to be minus. But if we flip that comparison around, we say if 0 is less than x1, then minus jump to the beginning of the loop. So now when we fall out of this loop, I think we still don't have quite enough instructions. Oh, maybe we do. Yes, when we fall out of this loop, we are in the no condition code state if x1 turned out to be equal to 0. We are in the plus state if that matched. Right. Well, that's shockingly close to correct. We did one harvesting operation when we shouldn't have. Shall we try to work out why?
It's midnight, so...
Yes, well, let's work out why, but not try to fix it. So, we get informed of 7-4 and 9... Well, yes. So what's the... So when it's that one that we fail on. So does that mean we fail when trying to harvest 8-5? Yes. Let's just think about it. So our first target is 7-4. So but now we're heading for 7-4. And we've correctly accumulated the 9-4 and 8-5 targets, and now the 7-6 target. We've now reached 7-4, and so now we're heading for 9-4. Then we reach 9-4. So now we're heading for 8-5. Now we've reached 8-5 and we're heading for 7-6. And now from 7.6 we head for 7.3, which takes us through why? That's not the correct direction to go to 7. Oh no. Now from, hang on, what? From 7.6 we're heading to 8.2. Yes, which takes us back through 8.5, and we didn't know not to harvest it. Right, okay. So that means we do need to make sure, we do need to blank out the RAM when we decide not to harvest something. Pity we have no instructions left to do that in. Oh well. So my attempt at doing the second one in... It's pretty good. My attempt at doing the second challenge of the day in an hour and a half didn't succeed because I haven't managed to get it to correctly decide not to harvest places that it has already harvested if it's going past them anyway. I mean, actually that one could be fixed by something in the movement control area wiping that, so that bit of RAM as well, if we wanted it to. Oh well, we will come back to this on Friday when I will not understand any of that code. So that will be fun. Until then, good night.